the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
You know, one thing that's really useful in talking to people who disagree with you and writing for people who disagree with you is just trying to find ways to like them, to like people. Jesus asks us to love our enemies. I think a good first step in that direction is figuring out, what do you like about people who disagree with you, right? Like, what's a first step towards showing the deepest Christian love that you can take in ordinary life?
It's the Drew Mariani Show on Relevant Radio.
Yeah, that was my next guest, Ross Douthat. He was actually talking to Morning Joe there. Has a new book out called Believe, Why Everyone Should Be Religious. And if you're not familiar with him, he's a distinguished columnist for the New York Times and really a profound voice in contemporary religious discourse. He came out with a very compelling new book. I actually have it in my hand. You might want to check it out. Like I said, Believe, Why Everyone Should Be Religious. And he presents a very thoughtful case for embracing the faith in our modern world. I know we all have this challenge with those around us, right? How do you do that at work? How do you do that within your family? How does religious belief align, with the order of the cosmos? I hear people all the time say, I'm spiritual, but not religious. What about the mystery of consciousness or this enduring reality of spiritual experience? I want to dive into all that. It's great to have Ross with us this afternoon. Hey, thanks for joining me today, and thanks for your great work. Great to have your book here. I look forward to plowing through the rest of it.
You're very kind. That's a wonderful introduction. I tell people, I joined the New York Times in 2009 as probably their first conservative Catholic columnist. Right. And, for most of my career, writing for fairly secular and liberal readership, it's just been sort of describing decline and scandal and defeat. So I'm personally quite excited to say, look, the rise of people with no religious affiliation is leveling off. It's not that we have a religious revival. It's more that we have a kind of desire for one in the culture right now, a kind of impulse toward belief that, takes a lot of different forms, some of them dangerous, I think, frankly, and dark. But I think it's a moment of interesting religious opportunity for Christians.
So what's your thought on it, though? I mean, I'll be honest with you, I was surprised. After COVID struck and we had, as a Catholic, Mass, from your house, you watched on your couch, or people who had a cup of coffee or were going to Mass in their beds. I mean, it was just crazy. And then nobody went back to church afterwards. We saw this massive decline because, we know virtue and vice, right? Vice is the formation of that bad habit. Virtue is the practice of good habits. And when you got out of the habit of going to Mass, people they said, well, lightning didn't strike me and things seem to be okay. I just thought, man, we're on a slippery slope. And yet now, we're not that far out of COVID and we see these numbers ticking back up. Is it societal factors? Are things tough for people and they're turning to God? What do you think is driving this uptick? Is it an anomaly or is the pendulum now swinging back in the other direction?
I mean, I think, to be sort of kind of rough about it, sometimes you have to hit bottom to start coming back up.
True.
Right? And COVID, in a way, I think it's sort of, if you hadn't had the pandemic, the trends that we're talking about would have continued at a slower pace for a little while and maybe hit bottom in, 2032 or something. But instead, because as you say, COVID, it sort of provided for a group of people, it kind of severed the last link to regular church going, I think, and sort of brought the period that we think of as like the rise of the nuns, people with no religious affiliation. It sort of completed that trend. Yeah. But once you complete a trend, then new things can happen. And I think that's sort of where we are now. And I think also it then the aftermath of COVID, the sense of sort of the societal bad mood that all of America seems to have, the sense of anxiety and depression and uncertainty about the future that is, I think, especially afflicting some secular and liberal people, but not only them. I think that also creates a kind of opening for arguments that were just harder to make, 15 or 20 years ago, right? You have the rise of the new atheists. You had figures like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and so on making the case against religious belief. And it wasn't so much that they had especially brilliant arguments. It was that their arguments were well timed for a moment when George W. Bush's presidency, which was sort of a high tide for evangelical power in America, was collapsing and he was becoming deeply unpopular. And the internet was sort of dissolving a lot of people's loyalties to institutions, including churches. So that was a case where the arguments of the new atheists were just perfectly suited to that particular sociological moment. But we're in a different moment now. And we're in a moment, I think, where no one really believes anymore the story that, if we just got religion out of the picture, the world, where everything would be better, right? A secular world, it'll be science and reason, and
right.
everyone will get along, right? No, everyone understands that that's not what happens.
So we live in this age that's really obsessed with reason and science and progress. And at the same time, we're seeing a growing sense of, as you just pointed out, anxiety. I've never seen anxiety levels at the level they are. We have an epidemic of anxiety and depression, emptiness, aimlessness. And I'm sure many of you who are listening to us right now, maybe you're experiencing right now. We have all this information at our fingertips, all this technology. Everything's supposed to be easier, but there, is this nagging question: what's the point of all this? And that's why I love your book, because we've been told over and over again that faith and reason are somehow at odds, that religion belongs to an age of superstition, and yet science, all this technology, this is the future. This holds all the answers. You dismantle that idea in your book, and you actually point out something fascinating, that modern science, it really hasn't disproven faith. And in fact, it's only deepening the mystery of it. Maybe you can unpack that for us.
Yeah, I think this is something that not only secular people, but some religious believers may not sort of focus on quite enough, right? Which is that there have been sort of particular moments in the history of modern science, the Galileo unpleasantness above all, but also Darwin's theory of evolution, where a discovery of modern science crashed into a Christian consensus. And there was, sort of understandable argument and unsettlement and crises of faith and all the rest. But the scientific progress of the last 100 to 150 years, especially in physics, has not had that effect at all. And it isn't just that it's sort of, confirmed kind of basic religious ideas about the mathematical beauty and comprehensibility of the universe. It's done all that, right? But it's also sort of delivered this really specific and fascinating realization that it's not just that the laws of the universe are, mathematically beautiful. It's that they seem to be incredibly precisely calibrated, fine-tuned is the term that people use, to allow for the existence of stars and planets and biological life and human beings, right? And when I say calibrated, people might think, out of 100 possible universes, you get, one that's like ours, that's life-bearing and so on, right? But no, what physics suggests is it's more like out of 100 billion potential universes. I prefer the technical term gazillion myself, but, out of some absurdly large number of potential universes, all of which would be, as far as we can tell, either unstable, they would expand quickly, collapse too quickly, or would just be dead. Like nothing would ever, there'd be no building blocks for life. Out of all those universes, ours is the only kind that can yield, frankly, us. And that's not, there's nothing in sort of atheist, materialist views of science that would have led anyone to expect this. This is not like, we expected this all along. No, quite to the contrary. This is something that scientists have sort of struggled to reckon with and to figure out what's actually going on. And so, there are obviously plenty of people who accept that and remain atheists and materialists. And there's a whole complex school of thought about how, there is in fact a multiverse and our universe is one out of a gazillion universes. And there are various arguments about how we only see the fine tuning because you have to have the fine tuning for someone to observe the universe and so on. So it's not like atheism has just quit the field. But there is, and this is only one example, right? There are a bunch of different converging ways in which what we know about physics, consciousness's relationship to material reality, which is quite peculiar, and then consciousness itself. It's sort of the resilient mystery of the way human beings in particular experience the world, that all seem to line up quite well with a traditional religious world picture, not only the Christian and biblical world picture, but certainly ours. And that's an important thing to understand and keep in mind if you're trying to figure out what's actually going on in the universe, because there's this idea that, that science sort of has decentered, knocked Earth into kind of an insignificant position, right? It's like, in the Middle Ages, people thought Earth was the center of everything, and now we know it's not. Well, we know it's probably not the physical center of everything, and it is a very small planet in a very big universe. But we do have a lot of evidence that, in fact, even if it's not the only reason the universe exists, it is one of the reasons that this universe was conjured into being. And that's a pretty striking realization.
I love that. Because, I ponder it sometimes. It's sometimes hard to get my head around. You take a look at the amount of stars that are in the solar system. I mean, each galaxy has hundreds of billions of stars. Our galaxy has hundreds of billions of stars. And the numbers of planets around those stars leads you to the quintillions, right? But then there are, scientists think, something like 2 trillion galaxies just in the observable universe, right? And each of those galaxies contain millions to trillions of stars. I mean, it's mind-boggling numbers. It's a gazillion, as you point out. Use that word. It's really hard to get your head around. And then I saw a TED Talk one time, because based on just the math, the possibility of intelligent life, many would argue, is high, that we're not the only ones in the universe. Yet I saw another, I don't know if it was a professor or where he was, he made such a compelling case on this TED Talk that perhaps God created the universe just for us. Yeah, and he made the case for how rare life is, how difficult it is to make the advancements that we have made to this point, and he went through the whole litany of it. Where are you on that? Do you think the universe was created for the human race? God loved us so much that this is just another way to show how infinite God is, how profound his love is for his creation, the human race? Or do you think perhaps like the people crawling from the caves and taking to the plains and crossing the sea, they discover a new world, the Americas? We will do the same thing by taking to the stars and discovering new planets and new peoples.
I mean, that question's a little bit above my pay grade. I think that it is based on I think it is very likely that, again, separating out sort of revelation and Catholic doctrine, just trying to look at it sort of, without my specific religious biases. Yeah. I think based on, in fact, the kind of arguments probably that professor was making in the talk, it's very likely that human consciousness and human intelligence is quite distinctive in the universe. That if there are other forms of life like us, other forms of life made in the image of God, to put it in religious terms, it's not a typical thing, right? Because if it were a typical thing, and this is something that people who study UFOs and extraterrestrials are always arguing about, but if it were a typical thing, the universe should be kind of crowded at this point with not maybe spaceships, but at least signals, right? Like because the universe has been around for a long time, and the fact that we don't have, the fact that we can sort of peer into the depths of space and send our own signals out without immediately encountering evidence of other civilizations suggests that either we're one of the first to reach this level of consciousness and civilizational achievement, or it's just really, really rare. So that's what I would be comfortable saying just on that basis, right? That we are one of the key species, if not the only one. Now, in terms of what it's for, I mean, I think we're going to find out, right? I think, Genesis starts with an admonition, right? To fill the earth, fill the earth and subdue it. Right. I think it's fair to say that we have done that. Here in the 21st century, we have completed that admonition. And not to be sort of too apocalyptic, but that suggests, one of two scenarios. Either, the story is kind of nearing completion, which is a father of 5 children. It's, you obviously come soon, Lord Jesus, but that wouldn't be my first choice right this second. Or fill the earth actually means fill creation, in which case it's there for us and we're supposed to go out into it, and the story is just getting started. But those seem, from a Christian perspective, like the 2 most likely possibilities. Either we're near the end of the story or we're near a really big pivot where the canvas suddenly gets a lot wider.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great theory too, because why not? Maybe the Lord, as I said, we took to the seas and colonized the new world. Perhaps we'll take to the stars. Maybe God's creation's there for us, and we're just beginning to write the beginning chapters. Hey, this episode of the Drew Mariani Show is on the Relevant Radio app. The Relevant Radio app is completely free, and it's updated daily with fresh articles, podcasts, and prayers. So don't delay. Download the app today. Thanks for listening.